Well, welcome everybody to the Business of Speaking show. I am your host, Tim McDonald, and joined by a dear friend of mine, Jeannie Walters. How are you doing today, Jeannie?
I'm great. It's good to be here, Tim. Thanks for
I,
inviting me.
yeah, it's been so long since we last connected, so I'm
Yeah,
really fortunate that you took the time to do this with me.
of course.
Yeah, and just so you know, and for everybody watching, the whole purpose of this show was really when I started back earlier in the year talking with speakers to learn more about how I can increase my business in speaking. And then this whole pandemic hit, and I was
Hmm.
having so many great conversations with people. And I really found that there was so many interesting stories, and speaking was much more than what I thought of just getting up on a stage. So I figured instead of just me having private conversations, I should do them online and make them available to everybody. Because Jeannie, you know me, I'm a very giving and open person. So
Yep.
I want to share all this knowledge with everybody. So regardless of if you're thinking of getting into speaking, are just getting started speaking, or are really anywhere along the path, what we talk about is not what the speakers talk about on stage, but their journey to the stage and what they've learned since they've been up on the stage. So, with that, Jeannie, I would love, because no matter how much I know you, I don't think I've ever asked you this question. Tell us your story of how you got involved in speaking.
Yeah, I was trying to think of exactly how that happened, and I was like, how did that happen? I'm not exactly sure. I think part of it is that there are, people who like you and me get involved with things, right? Like you and I were on the social media club board together, and I've done different things like that. And so some of it just kind of started organically there. And then as I kind of grew my personal brand, if you will, around customer experience, I was doing a lot of writing and blogging and things like that. And people just started reaching out and saying, will you come to our women's group? Will you come to our financial services, get together after work? So in the beginning, I was doing it kind of as an extension of that. And then it was really just a couple of years ago. I mean, I've been speaking in that capacity for probably a decade, but about 4 to 5 years ago, I had heard great things about the National Speakers Association, and I wanted to go to the big event. And there's an option where you can apply to be a professional speaker, and it's a different category of membership. And so I literally looked at the application. I was like, whoa, I can check all these boxes. And I kind of said, oh, I think I'm a professional speaker now. And so I started investing in a different way in this side of my business and really creating it as a revenue stream and a part of what I offer. And so that's really when things started kind of taking off from a speaking perspective.
And that was all just within the last couple of years then?
Yeah, I'd done a lot of speaking here and there. And I had been paid for it. I'd been invited to travel, all those things, but I wasn't really considering it as a core part of my business. It was kind of just when it showed up, I would do it. And what I realized was if I put a little more effort into, first of all, telling people that I did that and, really figuring out could this be a part of the business, because I love it when I do it. And that I finally put those two pieces together a couple of years ago.
Well, that's pretty interesting, and I love that you're talking about this being, part of your revenue stream of your overall business, because I know you had a business when I first met you of helping people with customer experience,
Mhm.
and you were one of the first people who exposed me to that term and taught me the difference between customer experience and customer service, even though they're kind of closely aligned. But so I'm just kind of curious, like, how does it really help your business in addition to just revenue?
Yeah, I what's been really interesting these last few years is there are so many different channels now, right? We have social media, we have podcasting, we have all these different things. And so what happens is the relationships I have with a lot of clients now are kind of built on the foundation of being an expert. But then what they ask me to do is write a blog, and then that turns into be on a webinar, and then that turns into we want to invite you to the stage. And so I think part of what has happened is this avenue that I wasn't even exploring before has become an even bigger part of the business from a thought leadership perspective and from really being able to offer. I get very passionate about this subject, as you know. Customer experience is what I do. And so I still have the consulting firm and still do a lot around that. But now I've got these relationships with companies that wouldn't necessarily hire me for consulting, but they definitely want to bring me to their customers. They want to make sure that they're providing value in a different way, not just through their software 5 to 6 years ago.
Yeah, and I know you mentioned that, you had a lot of opportunities come to you, and it all changed when you started putting a more focus on turning this into part of your revenue.
Mhm.
What were some of those steps, and what made you kind of realize that that could happen?
Well, I certainly learned a lot from other speakers, people that I respected and admired, people who I was connected to in either the customer experience world or the OG social media world that you and I were a part of. And once I started seeing them kind of turn things around and become speakers who were hired, I really paid attention to what they were doing. But I think part of it was really offering it as a service. I started to have to believe that, you know what, when I speak, when I am presenting information, when I'm either on a keynote stage or a webinar, wherever I go, I mean, my goal is to provide value, and I believe I do. And so I really had to own that. And that was a process for me. And in fact, when we first started exploring this, I was so hesitant about saying, "Oh, I'm the expert that you want." That was so uncomfortable for me that I actually had he's my director of marketing now, but at the time he was a consultant for me. He actually called some former clients, some colleagues, some people who had hired me to both consult and speak, because I wanted to hear from them. What is the value that I could bring? And then we turned that around and thought, okay, if I can own that expertise, that's a different experience. And so that's been a journey for me, frankly. It's not always easy, but I'm trying really hard to step into that a little bit more. And so that was one of the big steps to really make that change. And then I also just applied good business practice, right? Like sales and marketing and looking for opportunities proactively instead of just kind of waiting for the phone to ring. So all those things kind of add up to a real business.
Well, and I love that you say that, because I think all of us, when we first enjoy speaking, if we have the opportunity or think we want to, get involved in speaking, it's always like you think about just, oh, I just need to get up on stage and do what I love
Mhm.
doing. But you just bring up a great point that there's so much more to this,
Yeah.
that really makes it profitable and part of your business. So I'm just kind of curious, you know, how, because I'm really interested in like this mindset of how you got out of, and you say it's something that you continually work with.
Mhm.
So like how do you deal with that internally, in to help yourself get over the fact that you should be saying this and you should be putting yourself out there? And I'm also curious if you've gotten to a point where you're at a certain level, let's say, and you're ready to go to the next level. How do you kind of talk yourself into
Mm.
telling yourself that you're ready?
Oof. So I think, like a lot of people, I will admit that sometimes I suffer from the imposter syndrome, right? And I have this feeling like, oh my gosh, they're going to find me out. I'm not really as good as those other people or whatever. And I saw a speaker actually years ago, and I always remember this one line she said from that, which was, look at the evidence. And when I get into that mindset where I'm kind of doubting myself or feeling like, I don't know if I can do this, if that fear sets in, sometimes that happens, right? You get a big gig and you're like, whoa, that's a big stage. I don't know. And all of a sudden you're like, why did I apply for this? Why did they pick me? And I think part of what I do is now like take a deep breath and look at, okay, what is the evidence? What did a client say about me recently? What did I hear from, I get a lot of inbound things because I share a lot of content. And so I hear from people all over the world who say, thank you for doing this. And that is so meaningful to hear. And so I really, I have to do that sometimes. I have to almost act like it's a third person, right? It's not really me. And I also use the example of Beyonce because when she was first starting off, she had terrible stage fright. And she created a persona for herself called Sasha Fierce. And that's who she is on stage. And she has since retired Sasha Fierce because now she owns that she's Beyonce. I mean, come on. I would love to be Beyonce, but I I think there is an element where you have to sometimes step into that, you know what, this is scary, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I believe that I'm bringing value. I'm hearing I'm bringing value. I'm getting that, reinforced, because I'm not a huge fan of, people who say, I just want to be a speaker and I don't know what I'm going to speak about. Blah, blah. It's like, you have to have some sort of expertise. You have to have something that you can bring to the table that is valuable. And there are so many contributions that every single person can make. It's a matter of owning that part of it. It's not about being on the stage. It's about bringing that value. And that's what I really try to focus on. And that helps me a lot. And then the second part of your question is even harder as a business owner, because when you're ready to kind of move to that next level, I feel like it takes a tremendous investment in time and also like introspection, making sure that you're making those choices for the right reasons. I'm super optimistic. And what that means is that I'm like, oh yeah, I can do that in a week. No problem. Like, yeah, let me go ahead and double the size of the business in a week. What's wrong with that? And then I get over my head and then I'm like all of a sudden back to square one, doubting myself again. So I have to be really self-aware of those traits about myself. And I think that's something that every business leader needs: a healthy dose of humility, a healthy dose of introspection and self-awareness, because the more that we can tune in to both what we can bring to the table and also what things that we have that might be limitations in certain situations, we need to just be aware of that. And so I've invested in people who can help me, who have different skill sets than I do. I've invested in a lot of process and automation and things like that. But then part of that is I realized part of what I love is connecting with people. So I have to make time for that every day, and also not get swept away in what I love and just talk to people all day and never mention the business, right? Like, so I'm not sure if that's the right answer, but that's how I've been approaching it.
Well, that's your answer, so I can't tell you if it's right or wrong. And I just need to ask, because I know probably somebody watching is thinking the same thing. Did you ever have a stage name when you got up on stage like Beyonce had?
I've thought about that. I've borrowed Sasha Fierce a few times. And one of my friends actually, he was like, you're not Jeannie Walters, you're the Jeannie Walters. And sometimes I remember that too, like, oh, that's right. Like I can do this. So I do think that that helps. And again, like right before whatever I'm doing, I always think about how can I bring value? And that's what I focus on.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you for sharing that. I want to get back to, you mentioned a lot of stuff earlier about, a lot of people finding you via inbound methods because of what you put out.
Mhm.
And I know you and I first met when we were involved with Social Media Club in Chicago. So I know that, you're very active on social media. I know that you blog, but, can you kind of walk through, for people who may not be familiar, what is this whole inbound kind of, content, and efforts that you're doing, and what types are you doing, and what do you feel is working the best and for you?
Mhm. Well, what's working has definitely changed. So I think, being aware of how social media has evolved, how the marketplace evolves, all these things is really important. But right now, today, I am investing a lot in the blog. We're doing some pretty meaty content there that people are really responding to. And what happens is that gets picked up sometimes, that gets syndicated in different places that customer experience professionals hang out, right? Like there's a site called Customer Think that picks up a lot. There's one that's called My Customer. And so we have relationships with these bigger publications with bigger audiences that can help kind of spread the word that way. So that happens. After the blog, we always do a webinar now. I do LinkedIn Live every Friday, some Thursdays, depending on the schedule. But every Friday morning now we're doing an Ask Me Anything webinar. So I present the basic concepts from the blog, but then we just open it up. And that's been really amazing to see who comes to those webinars every week, who asks questions. We get a lot of follow up from that, of some people who frankly will never hire me, but that's okay. They are there to learn and they're really appreciative. But then are also people who say, hey, you talked about journey mapping. Is that something we could bring you in to help us with? And I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, it is. Or they say, you talked about this concept. Could you help us with an employee event and do a keynote for us? Things like that. So that's one thing. There's a rhythm to it that I think is really important. And that's something I haven't always been great at. And now I feel like we're kind of getting that down. People want to see your content regularly. They want consistency. They want to know that you're listening. So when people bring ideas to me and say, hey, I wish you would blog about this, I really try to honor that. And then I also do a lot of engagement on LinkedIn and Twitter and Instagram. And what I try to do on those different platforms, and actually, Tim, you were one of the people who said this, because it's really easy to put everything the same on all your platforms. And back in the day, you and I were like, nope, it's got to be different messages for different platforms. And I'm still a believer in that. There is some redundancy, but I think that it's really nice when people recognize my work. And so if they tweet out my article, I'm going to thank them for that. I'm going to say, wow, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I'm going to try to reciprocate if they're, in a similar situation. So I think that it's this mix of always being authentic with who you are, but at the same time, having some systems, some supports in place so that you're consistent, you are engaging, and you're putting out content that represents your expertise. That's the most important thing, because that's how people respond, and that's what makes them want to reach out.
Yeah, and I just want to reiterate for people that are listening to you and hearing, oh, some of these bigger publications in your industry pick it up and syndicate it for you. This doesn't happen overnight, right?
Excellent point. I started this business in 2009, and the only marketing I did for the first several years was blogging and social media. That was the only thing I did, and I toiled at that for a long time. So yes, it takes real work, and it takes building a reputation. You do not get a reputation overnight.
Well, I've known you since you had a blog, and you've been keeping at it for over 10 years now.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that I think is so important, because those things that people see and hear and read about are not just something that you just start doing and pick up. It's something that you put the work and the effort in, and people see that and respect it and then acknowledge that. So,
And can I add to that? Sorry.
Oh yeah, no, please.
I think it can be very frustrating when you're starting off and you're blogging or you're putting out posts and nobody's really engaging, or you're getting, your mom sends you a text saying, I loved it. And it can feel like nobody's listening. But what I would say about that is, don't underestimate the value of organizing your own expertise that way, your own content that way, your own thought process that way. Because I mean, I've always been more of a writer. And so there are times where I know that writing the blog will force me to think about it differently, will force me to come up with a conclusion. And that is valuable in itself. So if you're just starting off, I would say, keep going. There is value there, even if you don't think you're earning that audience right away.
Well, fantastic point. I think I'm hearing myself give that advice to many people over coffee in the past too. So I'm just kind of curious, as you look back on where you're at today versus when you first started making the concerted effort to get into speaking, is there any advice that you would give yourself if you could go back to that moment in time to be able to, help you with your knowledge that you have today?
Yeah, the first one is to know that you don't know, like know that there's a bunch that you don't know, because I think it's really easy to think, I had a great time speaking and everybody loved me and that was super fun and easy and I'm good at this. And so I'm just going to do it. And it's like, nope, you've got a lot of work to do. You still have to, first of all, it is a craft. It's like anything else that's artistic, but at the same time, you still have to bring expertise and really solid content. And so you have to make sure that you're always working on your content. You're always working on your presence, your skills as a speaker, and then treat it like a business. Treat it like a business. You have to make sure that you are letting people know what you can do for them, not just say I'm a great speaker, but what is it going to do for them? And look for those opportunities and go ahead and reach out just like you would for sales for any other skill. So I think that is what I didn't do for a long time. I was kind of looking at those invitations to speak as a compliment and as something that I just had to wait for. I wasn't really proactive. And when they would pay me, I'd be like, great, this is fantastic. But I wasn't asking. I wasn't really looking for ways to say, you know what, this is the value I bring. And so it's worth it to pay me for that. Right. So I think that's part of it too, is really understanding what you're bringing and learn from others. There are so many fabulous speakers out there. I always learn by watching and by listening and by being really tuned in when I watch a speaker. It's really easy to have that mindset of like, oh, I would do this differently. I'm not going to learn anything. But when you really watch, what are the things that land for them? Could you modify that? Could you make sure that the way that you deliver your closing has as much oomph as that speaker did? So all of those little nuances, just always be learning about it, because I think it's really, some speakers get into it and they think, well, I'm really good at this and I'm just going to get up on a stage and do it. And it's like there is so much more to it.
Well, that's, I think, a perfect way to kind of start wrapping up today's show. So, Jeannie, thank you. And before we kind of sign off, tell people, where can they find you? How can they connect with you?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, the name of my company is experienceinvestigators.com. And then you can also find me at jeanniewalters.com. I'm on LinkedIn. I love hearing from people on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter at JeannieCW. And, I love hearing from you. So feel free to reach out.
All right. Well, thank you so much. And thank you for watching. And if you don't know, now's the time when we are going to sign off from YouTube. But Jeannie has agreed to stay on with me, and I get to ask her one additional question, which she will answer. And we make this exclusive content for our email subscribers. So how do you do that? You head over to speaking.business. Just join the community by signing up for our email list, and you will get the exclusive content that comes out weekly. So thank you for watching, and thank you for being with us, Jeannie.